Hello and welcome back to Parc Fermé Parlay with Kieran Downey, Monaco Qualifying edition. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the practice, all the big moments from practice, just when we come on and talk about those drivers. I love Monaco Qualifying. I am a little bit upset because Charles Leclerc never got pole position, but I absolutely love the Monaco Qualifying. It is a highlight of the calendar. I would go to Monaco just to watch a qualifying session there and experience the hype that's there. The race can be obviously a little bit processional, but we'll see what happens tomorrow with the two stop. But quali is where it's at. And kicking things off with Q1, the drivers out are Franco Colapinto in P20, Lance Stroll, Pierre Gasly, Oliver Bearman and Gabriel Bortoleto. Now, there's a lot going on with grid drops, and I'm a little bit confused by it all because I don't know what's going to happen, and the FIA haven't released the official starting grid yet. I believe that's because they're still going through some impeding issues or potential impeding issues from qualifying. We did, however, go into qualifying with two penalties awarded to one to Lance Stroll, one to Oliver Bearman. Now, Lance Stroll got a one-place grid drop for causing a collision with Charles Leclerc in FP1. He had moved off the racing line going into the hairpin to let a driver pass. Didn't hear on his radio that Leclerc was also coming up behind him on a push lap. Moved over to the racing line and Leclerc ran into the back of him. Leclerc ended up with a broken front wing and Stroll ended up needing a new diffuser, floor, gearbox and rear suspension, which meant he retired from FP1, obviously to get all that work done. Now, he was handed a one-place grid drop, qualified 19th. Oliver Bearman was handed a 10-place grid penalty for a red flag infringement where he failed to slow down after the red flag was brought out in FP2, and he ended up overtaking Carlos Sainz, which is also against the regulations. Therefore, slam dunk, 10-place grid drop. This one, I'm actually quite happy to say, yes, that is correct. Unlike Imola, where I still don't believe he should have had his lap time deleted, but I'm not getting into that again because I'm just not. Now, my confusion is with Bearman getting a 10-place grid penalty, that means he'll automatically start at the back of the grid. However, Lance Stroll also has a one-place grid penalty, which means that he would then be starting from the back of the grid. Where do each of these drivers start? That's what I'm confused at. My thoughts were that Bearman would start from the back, he has the bigger penalty, that is what it is. But if that's the case, then Stroll would have to start 19th, which means he hasn't served his penalty. Because usually when this happens, if drivers have been given penalties, which means that they both start at the back of the grid, you're then lined up in whatever your quali performance was. So Bearman had qualified better than Lance Stroll, so Bearman would actually start ahead of Lance Stroll. However, if Stroll does start 19th, he's not served his penalty. So does that mean his penalty gets carried on to Spain next week? I don't know. Now, I did actually pose the question to Threads, and a guy that I generally consider to be like an oracle of F1 in terms of his knowledge and everything is just insane. He's generally not sure because he can't drop a place. He's just not sure how they'll sort it out because Bearman would be the one that would start at the back, but he's got the bigger penalty, so I would say he would start at the back. However, Stroll has just been given another 3-place grid drop for impeding in qualifying. Now, this one, I think, is a little bit of the reason why Pierre Gasly qualified where he did. Now, this one's a little bit confusing, so let me wrap my head around it. It appears that Lance Stroll was told that Pierre Gasly was arriving behind him on a fast lap. Now, Lewis Hamilton had already overtaken Lance Stroll on that lap, was also on a flying lap, and it appears from the radio communications that Lance Stroll wasn't informed that Lewis Hamilton would be passing him again, so had wrongly assumed that there was only one car to overtake him coming out of the tunnel. After he came out the tunnel, due to the position of the sun and his eyes readjusting, he says he couldn't make out the colour of the car that was passing him. So when Lewis Hamilton passed, he thought that that was Pierre Gasly passing and that there was no one else still to come behind him. Moved over and very nearly had a bit of an accident with Pierre Gasly. So that's that one. In all of this, as I said, I'm not entirely too sure how we go through it. Somebody has just replied to me and said that penalties are applied in the order at which they are given. So from this, Lance Stroll will serve his penalty by moving to P20. He will then be bumped up to P19 as Oliver Bearman serves his penalty, to which I believe Lance Stroll might be then moved back to P20 to serve his second penalty. I don't know. We're just going to have to wait for the starting grid to be published by the FIA because it's very confusing and I just don't really understand. I'm assuming that is the way they do it, that they apply the penalties in order. It just all is very confusing, especially with Stroll now getting more penalties. For Colapinto and Gasly, the Alpine drivers, they started Q1 both on mediums. I wish that we didn't do that. I know that there was a lot of talk throughout the weekend that the mediums might actually be the better tyre than the softs, but I do think that with everything going on, maybe let's not make that choice. One, it's a gamble that didn't pay off because actually the softs were the faster tyre. You could see that when the Ferraris put on the mediums in Q2. And then as soon as Russell caused the red flag, they were getting off them tyres because the softs were actually the quicker. I think what we've seen in Imola, very different tracks, not going to be the same thing. I also think that when you're coming into a little bit of an unknown in terms of this being the first time that we have a two-stop mandatory strategy, having an extra fresh set of mediums is probably going to be more beneficial than any sort of benefit that you would get through the qualifying. That's my belief on it anyway. Now, with that being said, they did actually take off the mediums and put softs on for their final flying runs. I do think in terms of Colapinto that he was maybe playing things a little bit conservative. For Gasly, obviously his flying runs getting hampered by traffic and an impeding situation, which will not have made him happy, and just didn't really manage to hook up a decent lap. Couple all of this madness going on with a very late red flag by Kimi Antonelli, which practically ended Q1 a couple of minutes early. It makes sense that Gasly and Colapinto are out where they are out. And then we have Gabriel Bortoleto in P16. I know that a lot of these drivers that are rookies have done this track before in Junior Formula, but it's a very different experience when you're in F1. The walls are a lot closer and obviously massive difference in machinery. So I can see why maybe there was a little bit of an error on the side of caution. The car was obviously capable in getting through to Q2 as evidenced by Nico Hülkenberg, but I'm not surprised that Bortoletto's out in 16th. As I said, towards the end of Q1, we got a red flag with Kimi Antonelli crashing into the barriers. He clipped the barrier coming into the Nouvelle chicane, just that one on the inside, dislodged his tyre, broke his front left suspension and sent him into the barrier. It's an easy error to make, going into that corner. Obviously, one, you are getting super close to that barrier to get round that corner, round that chicane. Your eyes are adjusting having just come out of the tunnel. There's, a multitude of different things at play here. The biggest one obviously being that you're at Monaco. But it's an easy error to make, one that we've seen multiple times throughout the years. I will say that for the rookies, this is an incredibly tough place to come. As I said, even those that have raced in the junior formulas here, F1 is a completely different experience. The machinery is so different. You are going at much faster speeds. The walls and the barriers are closer to you than when you're in a F2 machinery or F3 machinery. And when you're in an F1 car, especially going around this track, you have to be incredibly greedy. You have to go into the corners and the apexes of the corners way more greedy than what you would in other series of racing. And a lot of that is because you will get rewarded a lot more on the exit of that corner for every millimetre of risk that you take. So it is very unfortunate for Kimi Antonelli. He's not having the best time across last weekend at Imola, having a retirement throughout the race and coming into this session and crashing in qualifying. And it was just a bit of a disaster for Mercedes because in Q2, the drivers out were Kimi Antonelli in P15, George Russell, Nico Hülkenberg, Yuki Tsunoda and Carlos Sainz. Now Antonelli will start 15th because he did actually set a lap time to get him through to Q2 before he then went and caused a red flag in Q1 and crashed his car, which then actually ended the session because there wasn't enough time and no point really to start the session again for a couple of minutes. As I said, a complete disaster for Mercedes with George Russell causing another red flag during the qualifying session, this time in Q2. just a loss of engine power. Not entirely sure what caused it. From the replays, he lost power going up the hill towards the casino, was carrying such a speed and then was going downhill that he managed to coast his way all the way down into the tunnel where he eventually came to a stop, caused a red flag because they had to move his car off the road, which I will also say was incredible to watch because Russell stayed in the car to steer it. All the marshals came out and started pushing it, pushed it to a certain point so that those marshals could run back into the tunnel to take their positions for the resumption of Q2, whilst new marshals came and collected the car to push it further down towards the chicane and get him off the track that way. It was almost like a relay race with an F1 car instead of a baton. But yet, not entirely sure what caused the loss of power for Russell. He didn't hit anything, he didn't go over anything that might have caused it. So very intriguing to find out what happened there, or waiting just for Mercedes to let us know. So not a great qualifying session for Mercedes, and what I do hope is that they actually put Russell and Mercedes on one of the most outrageous strategies for tomorrow's race. I don't know, pit them lap 1 and then pit them lap 2 and then just let them run to the end. Like, I just want something a bit mental. I know that's not what we want because this new 2-stop strategy is supposed to introduce not so much better racing, but to try and make the race a bit more interesting. But I just want them to do something that's a bit mental. Next up is Hülkenberg in P13. I believe that is just where that car is going to be. I know that he was looking pretty decent throughout, but I'm not surprised to see it there. I do think that's maybe the ceiling for the Cyber around Monaco. We then have Yuki Tsunoda, who very unfortunately just couldn't hook up a lap and just didn't have the pace to get the car through. Very unfortunate though that he is out where he is in P12, and his teammate Max has gotten through to Q3, and so have the 2 drivers from VCarb, Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson, have both made it into Q3. Unfortunate for Tsunoda, and not much he'll really be able to do tomorrow unless they manage to do something mental with the strategy. And Carlos Sainz, very unfortunate that he's out where he's out, especially with Albon making it through. I do think there was more performance in that car and more pace. They just didn't have it there. They started on the mediums, they changed the softs after the red flag, and Carlos just didn't have the grip in the tyres to be able to really go and put an attack in, which is unfortunate. And finally, Q3, the lineup is, in P10 we have Alex Albon, followed by Liam Lawson, Esteban Ocon, Fernando Alonso and Isaac Hadjar. Max Verstappen's in 5th, followed by Hamilton, Piastri, Leclerc and Norris on pole. First of all, for Alex Albon, absolutely stunning lap in Q2 to get through to Q3. He was P3 in Q2, which was absolutely stellar. None of us expected that. I think he actually set the fastest first sector in Q2. Like, absolutely incredible. So well done to Albon there. They were the only drivers who went out in Q3, him and Esteban Ocon, who went out on the C5 medium tyre. I reckon if they'd maybe stuck softs on, they might have gotten a bit higher up. I don't know why the call was to put them on the mediums. It was pretty clear that it wasn't the correct tyre. Maybe they had used all their allocation up. I'm not entirely too sure. But you know what? Getting through to Q3 obviously is no joke. And I do think that they could have been higher up than P10. But it just is what it is. Liam Lawson having his best qualifying since 2024. Getting through to Q3, out qualifying Yuki Tsunoda, which is going to be a big talking point. A big talking point. I did think that maybe this would be a circuit that Lawson would struggle on ever so slightly and, you know, maybe wouldn't be able to get a decent performance in, but he was looking very, very good in that V-carb. Like, I was surprised at how agile it looked, to be honest with you. It looked incredibly responsive, which was exactly what you need around the streets of Monaco. Esteban Ocon through to Q3 for the 2nd time this year. Absolutely loved hearing the radio message between him and his race engineer, Laura, where she told him that he'd got through to Q3. It was just very, very lovely. As I said, he was on the C5 medium tyre. Wish he'd maybe ran a C6 there to try and get him a little bit higher up, but actually P8's pretty decent, and looking at who's ahead of him, could he have maybe gotten better than Alonso? Probably not. Very happy for Ocon there, and should be some decent points in the bag unless the strategies all go tits up. Fernando Alonso in P7, he actually came back into the pits early in Q2. He was absolutely exhausted. When they told him to box the car, he was like, thank God, I've got nothing left. Like, you could tell he was absolutely broken. But a great result getting him to P7 in the Aston. It seems to be the upgrades are working quite nicely there as well. It's unfortunate for Aston Martin that on the other side of the garage, Stroll will be starting at the back of the pack. But phenomenal from Fernando to be getting through to Q3. And is it time for Fernando to score points? Are we getting our first points for Fernando Alonso? I fucking hope so. I need him to have a good race tomorrow because I need him to score points. I just will not take it anymore. Isaac Hadjar in P6, an incredible comeback after crashing his car in FP2. He also clipped a tyre going into the Nouvelle chicane, the same barrier that Kimi Antonelli hit, and it obviously dislodged his tyre. I think it might have broken his rear suspension as well, so that was unfortunate, but a fantastic qualifying to just get that out and go ahead and absolutely attack it. P6, well done. I believe it's his best qualifying to date, and what a place to go and do it, to put in an absolute stormer of a lap and get P6 at Monaco. Like, in one of the hardest, if not the hardest qualifying session of the year, to go and do that, well done, my man. We then have Max Verstappen in P5, just didn't have the pace. I thought he was a contender for pole, but just couldn't really hook up the lap properly, just didn't have the pace in it, which I was very surprised at because through FP1 and FP2, Max looked to be struggling with the car, the pace didn't seem to be there, and then when we got to FP3, it was like they just unlocked, it's like they turned the car on. It's just that Red Bull thing of Fridays, not that great, Saturday, where this is here we are, we've rocked up to the racetrack and we've got our race car turned on to the highest, and I thought he was going to be a contender for pole, but unfortunately not. So there we have it, P5 for Max Verstappen. Now, there is currently an investigation by the stewards into an impeding of Max Verstappen by Lewis Hamilton. This happened in Q1, and heading up towards the casino, Lewis was told that Max was coming up behind him, but was then told that he was slowing down. So Lewis didn't move off the racing line, stayed where he was. Max was still on his fast lap and ended up having to abort. It was a could have been a quite scary moment, to be honest with you. That is currently with the stewards, and the decision we are... Oh, just as we were talking about it, here's the document from the stewards. Hamilton's got a 3-place grid drop. Lewis Hamilton, qualified 4th, has a 3-place grid drop for impeding Max Verstappen. Now, the stewards have reviewed the data and said that coming up to turn 2, Lewis Hamilton was off the racing line and was on a slow lap. Max Verstappen was approaching Lewis on a push lap. Ferrari informed Lewis that Verstappen was on a push lap and then went back and said that he was actually slowing down, when in actual fact Max Verstappen was always on a push lap and was never slowing down. Lewis being told that Verstappen was slowing down then resulted in him actually speeding up and moving on to the racing line approaching turn 3. This then meant that Verstappen had to move off the usual racing line and actually then had to abort his lap. The stewards examined everything and they have found that without a doubt Lewis Hamilton impeded Max Verstappen. Now, they have seen that it was a team error because the team told Lewis that Verstappen was actually slowing down. However, this feeds back into previous incidents where the team have been at fault, not the driver, such as Verstappen's unsafe release in the pit lane in Miami, but they do have to give the driver a penalty, as unfair as it may seem, because it is still a penalty against the team. So not a fantastic weekend for Hamilton, who was showing quite decent pace. He did crash at the end of FP3, coming up and around Massenet, turn 3, where he's also was found to be impeding Max Verstappen in qualifying. He is coming up on a push lap, encounters some traffic, has a little snap of oversteer caused by getting into the dirty air of the cars in front, loses the car and hits the barrier. Massenet turn 3 is an absolute incredible corner. It really invites you to carry a lot of speed into the corner if you hug the apex, and unfortunately for Hamilton, that's exactly what he was doing. He was ever so slightly out a little bit, but he caught into the dirty air of the cars that were on slow laps in front of him. It unsettled the car, he got snap of oversteer, and he slid into the side of the barriers. Looking at it, it didn't seem too bad, but the angle at which he hit the barrier caused way more damage than what it would look to you or I watching it over the broadcast. The team had to change the nose, front wing, right front suspension and the entire rear end of the car in time for qualifying. Now, it was the rear right suspension on the car that had broken, but it was quicker for them just to replace the whole rear of the car than just that one part of it. And finally, our top three with Oscar Piastri, Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris. Piastri, a pretty decent qualifying. He did also crash in FP2 but managed to get the car moving, and I have to say, very smart from Oscar Piastri handling that crash. Saint-Yves turn 1 in Monaco really invites you to miss the braking point, and it invites you to sort of brake late, and that's unfortunately what Piastri did. He locked up his tyre, and this is what I mean when I say he's incredibly smart. He straightened up the car so that when he hit the barrier, it was only the front wing that broke and none of the suspension or anything like that. He then managed to get the car out and moving, did leave his front wing in the barrier, but a pretty decent bounce back. Unfortunately for him, just didn't really have the pace in those final moments of Q3 where Norris was finding time. Leclerc had found some time. Leclerc, I'm absolutely devastated for him, because how are you going fastest in FP1, FP2, FP3 and then not fastest in quali? And I know he's only missed out by a 10th, but I'm absolutely gutted for him. But an incredible performance around here nonetheless. Like, to start the week liking memes of you diving off a cliff, to then going to FP1 and breaking your front wing because you've crashed into the back of Lance Stroll, to then go and have a couple of quite messy laps, to then stick it fastest, to then stick it fastest in FP2, then stick it fastest again in FP3, and look incredibly promising throughout all the qualifying sessions for your final run when it mattered, just to miss out by a 10th. Oh, I'm absolutely deviled for him. I'm so gutted for him. But what I will say is this is just a nice reprieve, I think the word would be. A nice break from being like 6th and 7th. And I'm just fingers crossed for a good race tomorrow. Lining up P2 is not that bad. There's every opportunity to get the lead into turn 1. It's also a 2-stop strategy. Who knows what that's going to throw up. I'm staying positive. I do think he should hopefully have a decent result and get some points. I'm hoping for at least a podium. I genuinely think we are more than capable of getting a podium. P1 I would absolutely love, but a podium I will be very, very happy with. I just need this one weekend to be good, because this circuit is, unlike all the others, we're actually running the 2024 rear wing instead of creating a new high downforce rear wing. This track is incredibly high downforce, and rather than use the money on creating a new wing for a couple of tracks, we're just going to run the 24 one. Is that smart? I mean, in the era of a cost cap, yes. It's obviously given the Ferrari a little bit of extra pace. I mean, Leclerc knows these streets obviously incredibly well. He's always qualified around here amazingly. I do think that when we hit Spain next week, we'll probably be back to the 5th fastest car again. However, I'm not looking at that. I'm just going to stay with my blinkers on, thinking about Monaco and how we're having a pretty decent time so far, apart from Lewis's grid drop. But things seem to be on the up, and I'm hoping for a pretty decent race tomorrow. A solid amount of points in the bag and a podium, because it's probably the only chance I'll have to enjoy a Charles Leclerc podium this year. And finally, Lando Norris. I don't have huge amounts to say other than well bloody done, because that was an absolutely stormer lap. It's a new lap record. It's pole position. It was incredible. I thought that Norris was really going to struggle. Who am I? What do I know? He pulled it out the bag. He's back on pole. It's wild to think that this is only his 2nd pole, considering he is an incredibly talented driver in the fastest car. But as I said, an absolutely incredible performance from Lando Norris, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens tomorrow, run into turn 1, and what can happen with this 2-stop strategy. And that is everything from us, from a very exciting qualifying session. Now, have they posted the starting grid? That is what I would like to see, because nothing yet. I just need to know where everyone's lining up I bet I come off this recording and that's when they post it, which will be incredibly annoying, but sod's law, innit? That is everything from us. We'll be back tomorrow after the race. See you then. Enjoy the rest of your day. Love you. Bye.